Auburn is once again a metrics darling, but will the curse of the Bruce Pearl be lifted in the NCAA tournament this year?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoops show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your solo host for today, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. And we're here for you all year long. We've been here 5 days a week throughout the offseason, ever since Danny Hurley and the UConn Huskies cut down the nets back in early April, and now we are here less than 2 weeks before the official start of the college basketball season. We got some fantastic games on day one. Gonzaga-Baylor in Spokane is a big one. Texas-Ohio State facing each other as well. Some really good stuff. Folks, I want to thank all of you who are making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and give a special shout out to those everyday listeners, those of you who've been hanging out with us throughout the offseason as we've kept you up to date on the transfer portal, the NBA draft, the freshmen coming in, all sorts of exciting stuff throughout the offseason. And now we're here. We got scrimmages going on, some secret ones, some not so secret ones. We are very, very close to the season. Folks, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet now, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, we are continuing our team preview series here as we've been trying to talk about as many of the top 25 teams as we can getting into the start of the college basketball season, going over the team's season last year, how they did, whether they made the tournament, if there was any major changes, storylines in the offseason, coaching changes, things of that nature. And then we get into the roster, new players, players in, players out, whether it's transfers, freshmen, some teams like the team that Isaac talked about with Locked On Louisville host Dalton Pence yesterday, they have an entirely new roster. Some teams that we've been talking about, virtually no changes. The Shaka Smart and Marquettes of the world, where they didn't make any major additions in the offseason. So we talk about that. We project some starting lineups, rotations, things of that nature. And then we close out the show taking a look at each team's schedule, non-conference and conference schedule, and make some predictions. Are they going to win the league? Are they going to win the conference tournament? What kind of seed might they be getting in March? And whether they are a real contender to cut down those nets at the end of March / the beginning of April. Today, we're talking about Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. Auburn went 27-8 last season overall. They went 13-5 in the SEC. Really strong season once again for Bruce Pearl's team. Didn't get off to a great start. They lost to Baylor in the season opener. No shame in losing to a very good Baylor team. That was the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They then lost to Appalachian State in early December. They won some games in between there, of course, but after the Baylor loss and then the App State loss, there was a little bit of concern about this Auburn team. Are they really going to be a legitimate player in the SEC? We knew Alabama was going to be good. There was a lot of hope for Kentucky, of course, as there always was in the John Calipari era. Some other teams that looked really promising, and Auburn was was unsure where they were going to fit in that mix especially after that loss to App State. But then Bruce Pearl's team went on to win the next 15 of their next 17 games. That included a win over Alabama, a massive win over Indiana, a win over Texas A&M, a pair of wins over Chris Beard and Ole Miss. Really started to establish themselves as a legitimate contender, a legitimate player, not only in the SEC, but across the entire college basketball landscape. A big part of that was the play of big man Johni Broome. We knew he was going to be a major piece for that team last year, but he was absolutely excellent, put himself on that All-American team. Was just a fantastic player all year long. They had other great performances as well. We'll talk about some of those guys in the second segment. Majority of them coming back to this program, which really puts them in a strong position going into next year. All said, the Tigers finished second in the SEC. They ultimately finished 18th in the final AP poll of the year. We're higher than that going into the NCAA tournament, but they earned a 4 seed in said NCAA tournament after winning the SEC tournament. They played South Carolina in the first game, a South Carolina team, mind you, that earned a 6 seed that was fantastic under Coach Lamont Paris. They beat South Carolina by 31 points in the SEC tournament. After that, they played Mississippi State, another solid team that made the tournament, narrowly escaped there. They only won that one by 7 points, but still got themselves a W, met up against Todd Golden and the Florida Gators in the SEC championship game and walloped Golden's team. 19-point victory for Bruce Pearl. They were absolutely rolling heading into the NCAA tournament until they get to Spokane, Washington, where they play their first round game against the 13 seed, the winner of the Ivy League, the Yale Bulldogs, who incidentally began their season in Spokane playing the Gonzaga Bulldogs. That was their first game of the year. Yale was comfortable in Spokane, apparently, because they knocked off Bruce Pearl and Auburn 13-4, 78-76 was the final score. A close, tight, exciting game. Those kinds of really, really close game. You know, we always love to see upsets. Everybody likes upsets. I know Auburn fans obviously did not like this upset, but in terms of what kinds of upsets you want to see, like when a 16 seed beats a 1 seed, it's always exciting. But when a 14-3 or a 12-5 or upsets like that, you still want to see close games. This was absolutely delivered in that area. Auburn just coughed the ball up too many times, 14 turnovers. Yale was red hot. That's how you pull off an upset, is you force turnovers, you knock down open shots. Yale went 9 of 20 from 3 in this one. Really nice performance from the Bulldogs. Auburn ends up going home early. And that's part of the conversation here for this Tigers team, because we know that Auburn went to the Final Four back in 2019. They had that devastating loss to Virginia. Really, really tough game for Bruce Pearl and the Tigers in that one. Of course, Virginia goes on to win that championship game and then does not win a single other NCAA tournament game before Tony Bennett calls it quits a few days ago. But since that loss for Auburn to Virginia in 2019, there was no tournament in the 2019-20 season, so you can't count that against Bruce Pearl by any stretch. The next year, they missed the NCAA tournament. That was a strange, weird season, the 2020-21 season. A lot of teams had kind of off years. Can put a little bit of that on some COVID weirdness, some schedule changes, a lot of things that happened there that kind of created a unique situation. And then in 2022, Bruce Pearl's team earns a 2 seed, but they lose in the second round to a 10-seeded Miami team coached by Jim Larinaga. The next year, they earn a 9 seed. They lose in the second round again, this time to a 1 seed in Houston. This was in 2023. So you can't really fault a team for losing as a 9 seed to a 1 seed. That's the expected result, for lack of a better term. But as a 2 seed losing to a 10 seed, and then as a 4 seed losing to a 13 seed, 2 of your last 3 NCAA tournament appearances have not gone as far as they should have gone. And at some point, you got to start to wonder about this. You got to start to feel a little bit concerned. Now, Bruce Pearl's won 64% of the games that he's coached as the head coach of the Auburn Tigers. Auburn is not historically a very good basketball program. When you bring in a coach like Bruce Pearl, who had pedigree coming into the program, who has had clear amounts of success, led them to their first Final Four, I'm not saying that Bruce Pearl's seat should be anything other than freezing cold. You're not looking to move on from Bruce Pearl. If he wants to stay, you keep Bruce Pearl around. That is not the conversation that we are having, and we are not anywhere close to having that conversation. But 2 of the last 3 seasons for Auburn, they have lost to a team significantly lower seeded than them. 8 seeds below them 2 years ago, and then 9 seeds below them last year. At some point, you got to break that curse, the curse of the Bruce Pearl, as we're going to call it here. Obviously, one of the big things we know about Auburn is they love to play those deep lineups, 9 deep, 10 deep. You wonder if playing so many guys, it in theory should create some more rest for guys, but I wonder if that's starting to impact them in March. Again, I think a lot of what happened in that Yale game was just one game flukiness. You play Yale 10 times, you probably beat them 9, maybe 8, but you beat them most of the time. And that's not to discredit Yale. It's just they got hot at the right time. They knocked off a really good team in Auburn. And now you got to rebuild. You got to figure out what do we need to do to prevent that from happening, to get back to the Sweet 16. And that's the conversation we want to have now. What does this team need to do? Because they made some key additions in the backcourt, which I think was much, much needed. They also kept some really important players, including likely 2-time All-American Johni Broome. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. And LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. And right now on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So folks, hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they may not have the time or resources to hire. So they're constantly finding ways to make that process even easier, including launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions. Post your job for free now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton here, still on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we are still doing our Auburn team preview as we get closer and closer to the start of the 2024-25 college basketball season. Here in the second segment, we're going to talk returners. Who are the key pieces coming back for Auburn? Who are the key pieces that are out the door? Lost a trio of talented players to the transfer portal, a really big player to the NBA as well. Who are the guys coming in? Who are the freshmen coming in, as well as the transfers? And then we'll take a look at our projected starting lineup and some other potential lineups and rotation pieces that this team could utilize next season. When you're talking about the returners, it's not just Johni Broome. Obviously, the conversation starts with him. He's every single outlet that you see, whether it's Kevin Sweeney at Sports Illustrated, whether it's the writers at CBS. I think Cam Salerno, Isaac Trotter have written up some All-American projections, whether it's ESPN, whether it's the write-up that I did at USA Today about the All-American projections. Johni Broome is on there for a reason. 16.5 points, 8.5 rebounds last year. He showed a developing outside shot. He is just a dynamic, versatile, fluid player who can contribute in so many different ways. And there's just no doubt that he is going to be one of, in a year where there's still a lot of great bigs. Zach Edey's out the door, sure. That's a tough loss for college basketball in general. Obviously, Donovan Klingen's gone. There's many others, but you still got Hunter Dickinson. You still got Ryan Kalkbrenner. You still got many other fantastic bigs. Graham Ike's back for Gonzaga. And Johni Broome is going to be a big piece for this Auburn team and is, I would argue, the first team All-American big man. If it was up to me in the preseason, I'd project him over Dickinson, over Kalkbrenner. It's very close with Kalkbrenner in particular, but Broome is right in that conversation as one of the best bigs in the entire country. But again, it's not just him. Chad Baker-Mazara is back as well, 10 points, just under 4 rebounds per game. Denver Jones is back in the backcourt, the biggest, most notable guard returnee for the team, kind of depending on what you consider Chad Baker-Mazara. I list him as a wing, but he's in the guard conversation as well. Denver Jones averaged about 9 points, 2 boards last year. You get Dylan Cardwell back. Cardwell was incredibly efficient as a backup center last year, very good rim protector, averaged about 5 points and about 4 boards per game. You get Chaney Johnson back at the kind of power forward position. Similar stats for him, about 4.7 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Chris Moore's back as well. Not a big time contributor, 2.5 points and 1.8 rebounds for him. Looking at the departures, the biggest one is Jalen Williams. Huge contributor in the front court. Kind of played off of Johni Broome really nicely at that power forward position. Jalen Williams is now in the NBA with the Denver Nuggets, the kind of player who I think is going to have plenty of success at the next level. Then you got 3 players who hit the transfer portal. Aiden Holloway, who was a freshman last year, didn't quite play the role that I think a lot of people hope for him. He's just still developing, and I think Auburn, he just didn't quite fit in the system. Didn't put up the numbers that I think a lot of people were hoping for him as a freshman. He's looked great for Alabama, which is where he transferred in the preseason. The little bit that we've seen from Alabama up to this point, a player transferring from Auburn to Alabama. Oh boy, that's going to make some really fun games in the regular season, especially if these teams face each other in the SEC tournament as well. He's going to hear a whole lot from that Auburn crowd in those games. The team also loses KD Johnson to George Mason. Johnson's a guy who was he was really good early in his Auburn career and kind of steadily declined just in terms of his efficiency. He was always a shot chucker. He was never really a hyper efficient player. And you just saw him kind of gradually phase out of being a key contributor for this team. So I don't like to use the phrase addition by subtraction because it sounds mean, if we're being perfectly honest, but I think KD Johnson's going to be a better fit at a program like George Mason in the A-10, and I think Auburn's going to be in a better position with other guards in the system. Let's put it that way. And then you also lose Trey Donaldson. He transfers to Michigan to go join Dusty May's team over there, the Wolverines. Another tough loss for Bruce Pearl's team. Lior Berman's also out the door to graduation, but this team's got plenty of talent coming in the door as well. Obviously tough to lose players of that caliber, especially in the backcourt, but big time addition coming over from the Furman Paladins, JP Pegues. Pegues averaged 18.5 points, 4.8 assists, 4.3 rebounds, and 1.2 steals per game for the Paladins, an NCAA tournament team. This is a really, really nice addition for Bruce Pearl's team. Should step right into that starting point guard role and excel immediately for this program. They also had Miles Kelly from Georgia Tech. Miles Kelly's a 6'4" two-guard, spent the last 3 years playing for the Yellow Jackets in the ACC. Last year averaged 14 points, 5.5 boards, and 1.8 assists per game. And then lastly, some more depth in the front court. Jaheim Hudson, a power forward, started his career at Georgia State, spent last year at SMU in the American Conference before they move over to the ACC for this upcoming season. Hudson averaged 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, and about 1 assist per game last year for the Mustangs. Again, more depth than anything else in the front court, but if you're going to go to a team where you're going to be a depth piece, 8th, 9th, 10th guy in the rotation, go to Auburn, because they play those guys a lot more than many of the other teams do across the college basketball space. Auburn also added a pair of freshmen to the roster here, 2 4-star freshmen. Tahad Pettiford, 6'1" point guard, 4-star. He's ranked 29th in this 2024 recruiting class at 247 Sports. They also had Ja'Kai Howard from Overtime Elite. Howard's a 6'6" small forward, 4-star as well, ranked number 61 in the class at 247 Sports. So looking ahead to what the starting lineup is going to look like, it's pretty easy to pencil in 4 spots. 3 of them go to returning guys. Johni Broome's going to start at the 5. Chad Baker-Mazara and Denver Jones are going to start on the wings. And I think you can pretty comfortably pencil in JP Pegues at the point guard position. That means you got your 3 guards or 2 guards, a wing, and one of your bigs, and Johni Broome all locked into starting spots. The main question is who's going to fill that 5th and final spot in the starting lineup. The rumblings, the indications, as we record this now before Bruce Pearl and Auburn have played any of their exhibition games. We'll talk about what their schedule looks like a little bit later. Even so, a lot of teams don't start their actual starting lineup in these exhibition games, so we won't really know until that season actually gets going. But the general consensus is that it'll be Chaney Johnson. Chaney Johnson, again, was the guy who averaged about 5 points, 3.5 boards per game last year. He's a bit of an undersized 4, but certainly would work in that lineup for this team. Again, was productive in a small role last year, as so many role players are for the Auburn Tigers, and would allow Broome to play that 5 spot. However, another option that this team could pursue, I don't think they would start with this lineup, but I suspect we'll see it a fair amount during the season, is to play more of Dylan Cardwell at the 5 alongside Johni Broome, who would then slide down to the 4. Dylan Cardwell was very efficient. He's not Donovan Clingan. I'm not going to compare him to Donovan Clingan, but in the sense of being a highly productive big in a small role coming off the bench, that's what Dylan Cardwell was. Again, 5.3 points and 3.7 rebounds per game last year in a small role. You put him in the lineup more, and you don't want to only play Dylan Cardwell when Johni Broome's on the bench, because you want those 2 guys to be able to coexist and play together. So if Cardwell's playing the 5 and Broome slides down to the 4, the nice thing is Cardwell's a very good shot blocker. He's a very good rebounder, so he can clean up on the glass. He can alter shots at the rim, and it allows Broome to be able to play a bit more of a modern big style. He can play more away from the rim. We've seen him become a developing 3-point shooter. He's got the ability to play away from the rim. He's not just a back to the basket, low post scorer type. That's what makes him so dynamic and what puts him in the All-American conversation. So if you're Bruce Pearl, you want to utilize his various skill sets. And one way to do that is to play Dylan Cardwell at the 5, play Broome at the 4. Again, maybe they don't go with that as their starting lineup. Maybe they do. I think they have the ability to do that if they wanted to, but I do think you'll see that lineup a fair amount. But if we assume the starting lineup is going to end up being Broome, Chaney Johnson, Baker-Mazara, Jones, and Pegues, then your rotation after that, Cardwell's probably your first off the bench. He's certainly your first big off the bench. Jaheim Hudson will be a 7th, 8th man off the bench, the guy who averaged 5.5 points at SMU last year. Miles Kelly is going to play a huge role off the bench. He's your 3rd guard. Between him and Denver Jones and JP Pegues, I think you have a very dynamic group of guards, and that's not even including the top 30 freshmen in the country in Pettiford. I think he's going to play a big role. He's probably mostly your backup one. He's more of a point guard than either Denver Jones or Miles Kelly. So I think he plays the one behind JP Pegues. And then you have Howard, the other freshman, kind of potentially filling that 10th man role as a 2-3 hybrid. And then you have Chris Moore, who again was kind of the 10th, 11th guy last year. He's probably in a similar role coming into this season as well. Looking at Evan Miyakawa's top 5 on the team. For those of you who don't use Evan Miyakawa's website, he has all the player ratings right now, and they recently came out, so you can sort it by teams. You sort it by Auburn. You look at his top 5 players on the roster. It points to a starting lineup that would be more favorable with Dylan Cardwell. In order, Johni Broome is number 1, not only for Auburn, but legitimately in the entire country. Evan's BPR, Bayesian player rating stat, has Johni Broome as the most efficient player in the entire country. Dylan Cardwell is second on this team. Now, these are rate stats that evaluate your performance, not based on how many minutes per game you've played. So that can skew the data a little bit. Regardless, Cardwell is second, Baker-Mazara is third, Pegues is fourth, Denver Jones is fifth. So in that lineup, I think Dylan Cardwell is 57th ranked player in the country, and I believe that Chaney Johnson is 507th. So again, take that numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt, but if Evans' data is indicating that Cardwell is that much better than Chaney Johnson, it wouldn't be a surprise to see that lineup get played quite a bit this season for Bruce Pearl and the Tigers. Well, folks, Auburn has a fantastic, loaded non-conference schedule, one of my favorites among any Power 5 team in the entire country. How much could that help them navigate the very deep SEC this upcoming season, and how much could it lead to them getting a favorable seed in March? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you get started right now with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We're talking Auburn today, so here are the odds for this Auburn basketball team coming into the season. First, Bruce Pearl squad at plus 2,000 to take home their first national championship. If you're all in on the Tigers, you're like, this is my team, these are my guys that are winning it all this year, that's a fantastic bet, well worth the $5 investment. But there's many others as well. You can bet plus 420 odds to make it back to the Final Four. Their odds to win the SEC regular season are at plus 220. Or if you're a big Johni Broome fan right now, plus 1,600 odds for him to win the Wooden Award. Obviously, Mark Sears, RJ Davis, lots of talented players that are in that conversation, but Broome is as good a bet as anybody at plus 1,600. That is worth the risk. If you like any of those bets or any of the other ones on FanDuel's site, go check it out. Again, you get $200 in bonus bets for throwing $5 down. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our Auburn preview as we are 10 days out from the start of the college basketball regular season. So excited for actual games to be back. We got some more exhibition games, some charity exhibitions, some secret scrimmages that have ended up not being so secret coming out this weekend as well. So we got more fun college basketball to talk about next week before we get into those real games shortly after that. Right now, I want to continue our conversation on Auburn. For them, in terms of the exhibition schedule, they start their exhibition schedule a lot later than some of the other teams we're talking about. Their first exhibition game will be a return to the Paladins for JP Pegues, as Auburn is taking on Furman on the road, again, in an exhibition game here. That'll be on October 27th. And then they will also host FAU for their final exhibition game. That's a charity exhibition on November 1st. So 2 pretty solid mid-major teams for Bruce Pearl to take on in the exhibition slate. And then they get into the regular season. I'm going to list their games here in terms of home, neutral, and away. At home, Auburn plays Vermont, very, very good team who routinely wins the America East Conference. They play Kent State, who has been in the NCAA Tournament quite a bit the last few years. They also play North Alabama, Richmond, Georgia State, and Monmouth. Those are Auburn's home games in the non-conference slate. And for those of you who have listened to a lot of these or who follow a lot of scheduling, you're probably thinking that doesn't feel like very many home games for a team, for any team really at this point in the season. And you're right. It's because Auburn's playing a lot of neutral site games during the non-conference slate. Their first one is a neutral site game, in parentheses, against the Houston Cougars very early in the season. And that game is in Houston. So that is a pseudo road game for Bruce Pearl and the Tigers. It is not at the Fertitta Center. It is not a true home game for Houston, but it is a game where there's going to be a lot more Cougs fans than there are Tigers fans, even if that Auburn fan base travels very, very well. That's a fantastic game, regardless of where you play, and Houston's incredibly good. The team also then is in the Maui Invitational. They open up against Iowa State. Speaking of fantastic teams, that's 2 top 5 teams right there, Houston and then Iowa State. They will then play either Dayton or North Carolina in the second game. I think you expect North Carolina to beat Dayton. But the winner between Iowa State and Auburn, I'm guessing Iowa State's going to be favored, but folks, that's going to be a close game. So we will see who Auburn ends up taking on in that second game, either Dayton or North Carolina. And then their third game will be against one of the following 4 teams: Memphis, UConn, Colorado, or Michigan State. Regardless, the worst case scenario for Auburn scheduling wise is something like Iowa State, Dayton, and Colorado. If that's the worst case scenario, that's still a pretty solid trio of teams. But there's also a reality where they play Iowa State, North Carolina, and UConn, or Iowa State, North Carolina, and Michigan State. Either way, they're going to get some really good games out in Hawaii for the Maui Invitational. Auburn also takes on Ohio State in Atlanta as a neutral site game, and Purdue in Birmingham. This is an incredible schedule. Guaranteed Houston, Iowa State, Ohio State, and Purdue all on non-conference or all in neutral sites. That is extraordinary. And then just to put a cherry on top of everything, they also go play Duke on the road as part of the ACC SEC Challenge. They go play Duke in Cameron. This is one of the best non-conference schedules for any Power 5 team in the country, and especially for a top 25, top 15, in some places top 10 team in the country to play this caliber of schedule before getting into the SEC, where you play a tremendous schedule. There's nobody who's played a bad schedule in the SEC. So to have this non-conference combined with that schedule in the conference play, this team is going to be battle tested. They're going to be ready. And again, if you're Bruce Pearl, I think you feel more comfortable scheduling a competitive slate of teams when you know you got key guys returning, like Baker-Mazara, like Denver Jones, like, of course, Johni Broome. You feel like, okay, these guys are ready. They've done it. They've played through the SEC before. We're ready to go with this group of teams. And I think the combination of returning talent, the combination of high-profile additions, particularly in the backcourt, and the combination of a very, very rigorous non-conference schedule sets Auburn to finish top 2 in the SEC. Ken Pom has them projected first at 13-5. I'll tell you right now, if Auburn goes 13-5 in the SEC, they're going to be one of the top 3 teams in the country, guaranteed. That is incredible if they're able to do that, even if they struggle massively in the non-conference and then turn around and go 13-5 in the SEC, which would be unlikely to happen. But either way, that's fantastic. Bart Torvik has them second in the SEC, interestingly behind Tennessee, not behind Alabama. Torvik has them going 11-7, which feels a little bit more, for lack of a better word, realistic, although still very excellent, of course. CBS has them second as well behind Alabama. And guess what? I also have them second behind Alabama. That's kind of the consensus for the AP poll, consensus for many people who are doing their preseason write-ups, that Alabama and Auburn are the top 2 teams in the SEC. I believe we even had them tiered as such, Alabama and Auburn in one tier, and then kind of that mash of other teams, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Arkansas, et cetera, kind of in that second tier of teams in the SEC. But this team is so well-rounded. They're well-coached. They're prepared. They have a great schedule. They have an All-American on their roster in Johni Broome. It's hard to not feel very excited about the possibilities for this team. Looking ahead to the NCAA tournament, they finish second in the SEC. If they win the majority of these games in the non-conference, I don't know that they beat all of Houston, Ohio State, Purdue, Iowa State. If they go 2-2 in those games and beat Dayton and beat whoever else they play in the Maui Invitational, I still think you're looking at a team that's going to be in that 3-seed conversation. If I was given odds of are they going to have a higher seed than they were last year or a lower seed, I'm taking a higher seed. I think they're going to be higher than a 4-seed. I think 4-seed is, I don't want to say the floor because anything can happen. It's college basketball. We haven't even played a game yet, but I would project Auburn to be higher than a 4-seed next year. I could see a 3-seed. I could see a 2-seed if everything breaks well. But the main question is not about what seed Auburn gets. It's can they avoid another early loss in the second round or sooner of the NCAA tournament? I think so. I think this team should get to the Sweet 16. Their guard play they have very talented guards, but they're not super experienced guards in terms of the NCAA tournament. Miles Kelly spent the last 3 years at Georgia Tech. He hadn't been dancing. JP Pegues, yes, Furman did make the tournament, but he doesn't have a lot of high major experience, and he doesn't have consistent NCAA tournament experience. They have the two guards who are freshmen who don't have that level of experience as well. Obviously, they have Denver Jones back, and that helps a lot. But I think if you were to have a concern about this team, it would be the experience of the guards in terms of being prepared for the SEC and the NCAA tournament. But is that enough to knock them to not project them to advance past the round of 32? No. I think this team's good enough to be a Sweet 16 team. I think they're good enough to be an Elite 8 team. And at that point, you just need to win a couple more games, and suddenly you find yourself in the Final Four or in the national championship game. I think that's very possible. I think Bruce Pearl can lead the Auburn Tigers to the national championship this season. Am I saying it's likely? Of course not. I wouldn't say that about any team in the country at this point in the season. But to say it seems very unlikely, no. I think this Auburn team is good enough to be a Sweet 16 Elite 8 caliber program with the way this roster is constructed, the way the schedule lines up, the competition they're going to face. This team is ready to be to break that curse, as it were, and find themselves back in the Sweet 16 and possibly even beyond. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and Leaf will be back previewing another team in the SEC for Thursday's episode. And then Isaac and I will be with you on Friday to get you your final conference preview of the preseason. We're talking the Big 12. It's going to be a fantastic show. And then after that, we got bold predictions. We got all sorts of fun stuff. And then boom, we got real college basketball game to talk about right after that. Thanks again for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, peace out.